Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Augustus Corbett podcast and TV. This is groundbreaking. This is my very first live on this channel. And you see, we have an exciting and controversial topic to discuss. We're going to talk about gun control laws and the Second Amendment. That is the reason why I changed the name of this YouTube channel, because there are some other areas that I want to discuss, including education. If it affects the African American community, I'm going to talk about it on this channel. That is what I'm about. I am about empowering, informing, and transforming the Black community. So gun control laws are definitely impacting African Americans and the Black community. So we need to talk about it. That is today's topic. All right. So, as a title, let's get into it. As a title, what we want to talk about today specifically are gun control laws emotional or are they rational? Are they emotional or are they rational? That's what I want to talk about. Now, before I get going in this, I want to invite you all to join in, comment. Again, this is the very first show, but come on in and let's talk about it. We have witnessed two very, very, very sad, tragic, and unfortunate mass shootings over the past few weeks. First in Buffalo, New York, a racist white supremacist just slaughtered, murdered 10 or 11 people. Sorry, I don't have the exact number. And they were elderly people, they were men, there were women, some as young as, I believe, in the early 30s, some in their 80s. And he just went in and just slaughtered them because of their skin color. And he used an AR-15, reportedly. He has since been charged with hate crime, with hate crimes for those murders. And before we could really grieve that good, another lone shooter went to an elementary school of all places and slaughtered 10, 11-year-old children. I mean, just slaughtered. I was so impacted by that. I mean, it still gets me when I think about it. The days following that shooting, I tell you, it was just amazing. It was heart-wrenching. It was heartbreaking. I cried. I wept. I prayed. It was awful. And yes, of course, the question then arose, as always following these shootings. What is the solution? And quite often people will immediately start talking about gun control laws. Gun control laws. And that tends to dominate the conversation after one of these tragic shootings. Gun control laws. And so that's why we're asking the question, are gun control laws emotional or are they rational? In order for us to decide if they are emotional or rational, we got to look at data. We got to look at statistics. We can't allow just our emotions to lead us in trying to address this issue, because our emotions may get us off into something that doesn't really address the issue. And we need to address the issues that brings about these shootings. And so I think it's a very reasonable question. Are gun control laws emotional or rational? Now, let's start our discussion by looking at the Second Amendment. Now, we're not going to look at the actual Second Amendment text, but in 2008, the United States Supreme Court issued an opinion called the District of Columbia versus Heller. And the court said essentially the 2A, the Second Amendment, protects Americans' right to bear arms for personal self-defense. Now, I'm reducing the opinion down to a soundbite, to 2 sentences. But I'm an attorney. I read the case several times, and my paraphrase of the ruling is accurate. And so the court said, among many other things, that the Second Amendment, in fact, protects Americans' right to bear arms for personal self-defense. The court recognized, however, that guns are very dangerous. There are a lot of shootings in our country. And so the court, and by the way, the opinion was written by the late Antonin Scalia, Justice Antonin Scalia, and he said that some restrictions on guns are reasonable because of the dangerousness and the fact that guns are used quite often in our country. So again, the Second Amendment definitely protects our right to bear arms for personal self-defense. However, some reasonable restrictions on gun ownership are okay. They don't violate the Heller opinion. All right? So that's what we want to talk about. What gun control laws are rational, reasonable, and not based on emotions or politics or partisanship, but which ones are get to the root of the problem? Which ones, had they been in place, could have stopped either one of these shootings? Or are some of these gun control laws just based on people's political, partisan, emotional positions? Again, those may take us off into territory that will not address the issues that, caused these shootings in the first place. Now, did some research, and in 2020, according to the Pew Research Center, 45,222 people died by guns. That's a lot of people. 45,222 people died by guns. But let's look at this number a little closer. All right, a little closer. So we asked the question, what percentage of these people who died by guns in 2020 were by suicide? And the number is 54%. Over half of the people who died by guns in 2020 died by suicide. All right? Moreover, what percentage of people who died by guns in 2020 were killed by pistols? Almost 60%. Almost 60%, almost 2/3 were killed by handguns. And half of those that were killed by guns, it was suicide. All right, we're looking at the numbers here. We're looking at the statistics. We're looking at the facts. We're looking at the data. Because gun control laws should be based on this data, not emotions, not politics, not partisanship. All right, what percentage of people who died by guns in 2020 were killed with AR-15s? Because those are the guns that the people who want to control, the guns, those are the guns that they really go after, the AR-15. But look here. Of the 45,222 people in 2020 who were killed by guns, only 3% of them were killed by AR-15. Whereas we said 59% of the 45,000 people killed by guns were killed by handguns. Only 3% of these people were killed by AR-15s. Yet it is the AR-15 that gets most of the attention. All right, what percentage of people who died by guns in 2020 were in a mass shooting or was a part of a mass shooting? 1.1% in 2020. Let's see, we got someone who joined us, L.A. Thorne. Thank you for joining us. L.A. Thorne says gun control should be removed entirely. All right, we want to hear your opinions. Get in here and let's talk about it. I'm going to share my opinion in just a moment. So what percentage of people who died by guns in 2020 were a part of a mass shooting? Only 1.1%. The highest number, the highest possible number, according to the Pew Research Center, was maybe 500 people that were killed in mass shootings. Yet those are the ones, and this is what angers me, quite frankly, because those are the shootings that the media harps on. Those are the shootings that the politicians tend to harp on. Not all of the other shootings by guns that are not, the 98.9%? You see, that's where the focus should be. The mass shootings are horrible because so many people died at one time. They're horrible. And like I said, we all suffered emotionally from the murder of those precious people in Buffalo, as well as those precious children in Uvalde. But again, in 2020, only 1.1% of people who were killed by guns died as a result of mass shootings, and only 3% by AR-15s. So our attention, it seems to me, should be elsewhere. Our attention should be dealing with folks who are suffering from mental illness, who are committing suicide at record numbers. And a lot of those people are African Americans. Suicide has risen across the country, but it has risen disproportionately in the Black community. So we need more resources, more mental health resources available to people who are on the brink of committing suicide. And I can tell you as an attorney, it is really, really, really hard to get people mental health help, assistance, in most states, especially here in Texas. In fact, the governor here, Governor Greg Abbott, cut the mental health budget by tens of millions of dollars in 2021. So again, when we look at the facts, when we look at the data, when we look at the statistics, I think we're focused on the wrong thing with the gun control laws that are being proposed. I favor some gun control laws. I'll tell you what they are in just a moment. So when I look at the data, when I look at the statistics, they raise several serious questions. Number one, in my mind, I begin to ask, why focus on AR-15s when they account for a few deaths every year? I mean, the thing that I hear all the time from people who want to control gun ownership is ban AR-15s, ban AR-15s, ban AR-15s. Well, if you ban AR-15s, you would only address 3% of the gun deaths in America. In 2020, had there been an outright ban on AR-15s, that would have impacted only 3% of the people who died. And if those AR-15s were used in mass shootings, that would have impacted only 1.1% of the gun deaths in America. So banning AR-15s does not seem to be an effective gun control measure. And because of the Second Amendment, I believe law-abiding citizens should be able to own AR-15s. That is my personal belief. Law-abiding citizens are not the problem. The problem are the people who are using guns illegally and murdering people, or people who have, some serious mental illness that cause them to murder people. So law-abiding citizens, put it this way, criminals are not going to follow some gun control law. They're criminals. So they're not going to follow that. They're not going to say, okay, I'm not going to buy this AR-15 because it's against the law. I mean, they are criminals. They are already breaking the law. So what sense does it make to ban AR-15s when, number one, only 3% of the gun deaths in 2020, that was the most recent year that we got this data, only 3% of the people who died from guns died from AR-15s, and AR-15s, which were used in mass shootings most often, only accounted for 1.1% of the people who died. We said, and I'll keep saying it, I'll keep repeating it, 59% of the people who died by guns in 2020 died from the use of a handgun. And 54% of those people died because of suicide. Put the emotions to the side for a minute. Put the politics to the side for a minute. Look at this rational. Look at this based on the data. And it becomes very clear that our focus is misplaced when we focus just on AR-15s. Now, when I look at this number here, 59% of the gun deaths in 2020 were handguns. That tells me, again, as an attorney, that tells me that there are a lot of deaths that are occurring, a lot of murders that are occurring because of some of the issues that, for example, some of our young people are dealing with. All right, some of these young folks are gangbangers. Some of them live in very bad neighborhoods. Some of them attend failing schools. Some of them are in the streets. Some of them are coming from broken families. You got, these people who shouldn't have handguns or AR-15s or anything like that in the first place. So my point is, why not let's put some real focus on what is causing these 59%, these people who are using handguns to kill folks. Why not put the focus on trying to rehabilitate those people, on trying to provide those people what they need to make better choices, to attend better schools, to have better opportunities? See, we don't want to talk about that. We just want to enact, gun control laws that really doesn't get to the root of this 59% here, or the 54% of suicides. That's why I say most gun control laws are emotionally based and not rationally based. So we'll feel good, by enacting an AR-15, a ban on AR-15s. We'll feel good. There'll be some folks who will feel good. We got AR-15s banned. But it's only going to deal with a very small percentage of the gun deaths per year. All right? All right, so let's go back to our questions. Why focus on AR-15s when they account for few deaths every year? I think that's a very rational question. Number 2, should law-abiding blacks disarm? Now, this gets me into a whole nother area. I said shortly after the Uvalde killings, murders, that as an African American, I'm not going to disarm. I'm not going to disarm. When this nation has disarmed African Americans, it put us at a grave disadvantage. We have 400 years of race massacres, racially charged, racially motivated hate crimes, where we couldn't defend ourselves because we couldn't own firearms. Well, my recommendation to any law-abiding African American is to strap up. And the days that we live in now, with these boogaloo boys and other white supremacists who are on a rampage, it seems, who are trying to take over the government, who, we just saw in the news last week a bunch of white supremacists loaded up in a U-Haul van and were going to attack a gay parade. I mean, why would any rational, law-abiding African American disarm in this environment? Here's the way I see it. I don't want to be the only person, and I don't believe African Americans should be the only people in this nation who don't have AR-15s. In other words, the criminals are going to have AR-15s. The police will have AR-15s. The military will have AR-15s and AK-47s and everything else. The white supremacists are definitely going to have their AR-15s. And so with those groups of people having AR-15s, why would I, as an African-American man, give up mine? Disarm? It makes no sense. If you're law-abiding, you should be able to own. In fact, I would encourage you to own and AR-15. Law-abiding African American. We need protection. This is a dangerous country, and it's becoming even more and more and more dangerous. If Trump and his followers take control of the government, we could be very well looking at a race war, a civil war. There's no telling. We live in dangerous days. We need to be able to protect ourselves. That's not advocating violence at all. Absolutely not. Law-abiding people. I'm one. We're not out committing violence. No, we're not law-abiding. The law-abiding means we abide by the law. So we're not going to take a gun and go out and murder and rob and steal and kill. That's no. Our guns are for recreation, secondarily, but primarily for self-defense. And if anyone needs to be able to defend themselves in this country, it needs to be African Americans. So should law-abiding blacks disarm? No. Absolutely not. Number 3, what gun control laws should law-abiding blacks support? There are some, and I'm going to name some in just a moment. Before I do, let me look. We got some comments here. So L.A. Thorne has made some comments, quite a few. My sweetheart has made several comments as well. She says support 2A rights, but folks who are harmful to themselves or others don't need firearms. That basically paraphrase exactly what I believe. That's exactly what I believe. I believe that we should keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. Whether they're dangerous because they're criminals or whether they're dangerous because they have some mental illness. We should do everything possible to keep guns out of the hands of those people. And currently, our gun control laws don't do that. Both of these shooters, the Uvalde shooter as well as the Buffalo shooter, obtained their guns legally. But obviously, neither one of them should have had guns. So what kind of gun control laws can we enact to get at people like that? So I do have some ideas here. So why doesn't our government do more to address the real issues behind gun deaths? That's what I was just talking about a moment ago, okay? Addressing suicides, addressing all of the gun deaths that are associated with crime in the streets, the handgun deaths. I mean, we see it every day in our community. I certainly see it as an attorney. We see it all the time, yet our government does nothing or very little, if anything, to address those issues. So what gun control laws do I favor? And I do favor some, all right? Number 1, I favor universal background checks. Universal background checks. I believe that anyone who purchases a gun should be required to do a background check. Every time I have bought a gun, I have had to do a background check. I've had to wait until that check was done. Every time. Usually would take only 30 minutes, 45 minutes. All right. So that is not burdensome. Just like Antonin Scalia, the late Justice Antonin Scalia said in the Heller opinion, some reasonable gun restrictions do not violate the Second Amendment. And one of which is universal background checks. B, if you're buying a gun at a gun show, if you're buying a gun from a friend, let's just require that everyone do background checks. Now, I had some discussion about this with my wife. I gave her the example. Let's suppose I wanted to transfer one of my guns to my son, who I know is a law-abiding citizen. Some people feel like, why should we have to do a background check on somebody we know, like a family member, close friend? Why should we have to do a background check on those people? Well, it is burdensome. It is something that I disagreed with, but my wife convinced me that that is a small price to pay to try to catch the bad apples. All right. So if that's what we need to do to try to keep guns out of the hands of people like the murderer in Uvalde, or the murderer in Buffalo, or the murderer in Charleston, we'll talk about him in just a second, then I'm willing to inconvenience myself to do that. So universal background checks. Red flag laws. These to me are really, really, really important. And basically what they do is, if someone notices that a person is having some issues and that person already owns a gun, then they can file a motion with the judge, and a judge can decide whether or not this person should lose his gun temporarily. For example, the young man who killed those children in Uvalde, if some family members or someone else knew he had purchased these guns, yet they seen something about him that was dangerous, then they could have filed something with the judge in a court, said, Judge, we believe this person is dangerous. This is our loved one. We don't want him to hurt anybody, don't want him to hurt himself. Here's the evidence that we have. We ask that you would take his gun from him for 30 days so that we can have him evaluated, so that we can make sure everything is okay, because we are afraid for him or her, and we are also afraid for ourselves and for others. That seems reasonable to me. Now, of course, there ought to be parameters, right? Every little thing should not be used to take people's guns from them. Every little issue. So there should be some parameters. That's why that's why you file a motion with the judge and let the judge make that determination. All right. It's not the police taking the gun. It's not a politician. It is a judge who we expect to be fair, to be neutral, to be objective. So let the judge make that decision based on the evidence in front of the judge. So red flag laws, I think, are a very good compromise. All right? Could have saved a lot of lives if they were enacted here in the state of Texas, and somebody noticed something, dangerous about the Uvalde shooting that possibly could have been prevented. So universal background checks, red flag laws. Second, close the Charleston loophole. What is that? The Charleston loophole is a loophole that allows a person to take possession of a firearm because the background check took more than 3 business days. So if someone goes to an FFL, a federal firearm licensee, a person who is licensed by the federal government to sell firearms, let's say like Dick's Sporting Goods or Academy Sporting Goods or some other gun shop. So they're required to do, as an FFL, they are required to do the background check. Now, the Charleston loophole will allow that FFL to transfer that gun to a person if the background check does not come back within 3 business days. And it's called the Charleston loophole because the young white supremacists who murdered those 9 black folks in the Mother Emanuel church in Charleston, South Carolina, got his gun because of that loophole. His background check took more than 3 business days, and he was given that handgun. And he used it to murder those 9 people after Bible study and prayer. That loophole needs to be closed. In other words, if the background check does not come back good or positive, even longer than 3 business days, the licensee should not be, the FFL should not be allowed to transfer that handgun. He should wait until he get yay or nay from the FBI. Close the Charleston loophole. Close the boyfriend loophole. This one is a little iffy to me, all right? But this loophole here basically, if a husband physically is convicted of physically abusing his wife, then in many states he loses his right to own a firearm. And not only is that state law, but that is also federal law. All right, he loses his right to own a firearm. So that firearm can be taken from him, or he can be charged with an offense if he continues to possess a firearm after he has been convicted of domestic abuse or family violence. But that doesn't apply to boyfriends. So if the couple is not married and the boyfriend physically abuses his girlfriend in many states and pursuant to federal law, it would not require that boyfriend give up his right to own a firearm. And it could be boyfriend or girlfriend, right? I'm using boyfriend, but it could be either or. So that is another loophole that should be, many people believe should be closed. I'm sort of on the fence about it, because sometimes, again, as an attorney, you represent people. I've represented many boyfriends who were accused of family violence, and it turns out the facts were not what the complaining witness said they were. And sometimes people end up pleading to charges just because they could be innocent, but just because they fear going to trial and fear the consequences of taking their case to trial. There are a host of reasons why this could be iffy in certain circumstances. So I'm kind of on the fence for it, but, to save a life, I'm all about doing whatever is necessary to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. All right. So that is another possible, I think that is another gun control law that I know I could support. Strengthen mental health gun laws. Very, very, very important. And by the way, we don't want to single out people who suffer from mental illness as if they're especially dangerous or particularly dangerous or disproportionately dangerous. I'm not making that argument. In fact, I know that's not the case. When you look at the data, that is not the case. Oftentimes, people who are mentally ill are the victims of violence. But there are some who suffer from certain types of mental illness that make them dangerous, and they should not own a firearm. But there are all kinds of loopholes and breaks in the system to where the FBI just simply are not aware that someone is suffering, for example, from some undiagnosed mental illness. Some undiagnosed mental illness. Like, for example, the young man who killed who murdered the people in Buffalo was required in an earlier incident to get a mental health evaluation. I'm not sure, but it doesn't sound like that evaluation made its way to the FBI. And why didn't it? Because federal law requires that someone who's suffering from mental illness, that is not reported to the FBI until they have been finally adjudicated. In other words, they have been found to suffer from some mental defect or have been ordered to take treatment or something. But if someone just takes an evaluation, they really may be suffering from some mental illness, but for whatever reason, they're not diagnosed that way, no court. And even if, by the way, even if a mental health expert diagnoses them with a mental illness, that still may not find its way to a court system or to a judge for a judge to adjudicate the person as having some sort of mental defect. And so you got all these folks out here with undiagnosed mental illness, or even in some cases diagnosed mental illness, but the diagnosis, the information does not reach the FBI because the law doesn't require it. And it's those people, like the Uvalde guy and the Buffalo shooter, it's those people who oftentimes ends up with guns, who are suffering from mental illness. In the case of the Uvalde shooter, and possibly the guy, the white supremacist, although I think he was just, he wrote a 500-page manifesto. He was just a white supremacist. And that should be a reason to keep a gun from people as well, right? Someone who has hatred for other races of people in their hearts. They shouldn't be firearm owners because we know what they can do. We have a history of what they can do and what they will do. So these loopholes need to be closed. And these laws need to be enacted to protect the rest of us. And none of this violates the Second Amendment. Because again, the latest case on the Second Amendment said that, yes, Americans have a personal right to own a firearm, but at the same time, reasonable restrictions on gun ownership do not violate the Second Amendment. So I'm for sensible gun control laws, but do not infringe on my rights, my Second Amendment rights. I am a huge defender of the Second Amendment. Huge. These laws that are based on emotions rather than based on reason and data and statistics will only impact people who are law-abiding, because criminals could care less about some gun control law. All right. So that's what was on my mind today. I really appreciate you joining with me. Let's see here. Before I end this, I want to see if I covered everything that I wanted to cover. I believe I did. So we're going to close this out. Again, thank you for tuning in. This is the Augustus Corbett podcast and TV. And as you see, we're going to the topics that I discussed will run the gamut. They will run the gamut. No question about it. No telling where we'll end up. But again, thank you for joining us. I enjoyed it, as always. Peace. Have a good one. Bye-bye.